Hello and welcome to another episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories. As usual, I'm your co-host Steve Wirt, and I'm with.
Tim Hannon.
Alrighty, and on today's episode, we're going to be reviewing the 2004 draft. Do you remember where you were in 2004, Tim?
Yeah, I do. I was about 3 or 4 weeks away from getting married, so I remember that spring very well.
Well, I guess it would be memorable. I don't remember. I remember 2005 more than 2004, but I don't know. I was working and I'd been married. How long had I been married?
5 years.
3 years, 4 years, 2001.
Three,
Yeah.
three.
Yeah. So I was a couple years ahead of you there. But so what was happening besides me and Tim's personal life? The Steelers were gonna select a draft pick, and as we know and we've seen over the years, sometimes these draft picks can be like tricky things, and sometimes they work out, like this one did, and sometimes you get Gabe Rivera, or I'm trying to think of who's another Jermaine Stevens, another bust, but sometimes you get a James Conner, or fingers crossed, maybe Kenny Pickett, right? I don't know. Cam Hayward, there's another good draft pick. So this is actually very influential. It involves a lot more pieces than just the Steelers, and it would affect the fortunes of 3 different players, and actually probably 3 or 4 different franchises for the next decade, I would guess to say. So setting up some background, how did we get here in 2004? So 2003, as we always do, we got to look back at least one season. The Steelers had a 6-10 season, and believe it or not, as of 2022, this is the last losing season to date. Can you believe that, Tim? It's the last time they've had a losing record.
Hard to believe.
So that's through 2 coaches. They have not had a losing record under Cowher since then, and although Cowher would only be like a coach for 3 more seasons after that, but still. And of course, Mike Tomlin, who's been there for a while now. So what was going on? The QBs that they had on the roster that season were Tommy Maddox, Charlie Batch, and Brian St. Pierre, the immortal Brian St. Pierre. So the running backs were Jerome Bettis and Amos Zaraway. That team, even with this 6-10 record, did have 3 Pro Bowlers: Alan Faneca, Hines Ward, and Casey Hampton, who I think Casey Hampton is one of the more underrated players, at least outside of Pittsburgh. Like, people, worship like that one guy. Is it Vince Wilfork? I think he's way better than Vince Wilfork ever was, but hey, that's just me. The defense did have Jason Gilden, but that was his last season with the team. That team did not win back-to-back games all year.
Wow.
Yeah. Maddox threw 18 touchdowns, but that's the good news. The bad news was that he threw 17 interceptions, and I didn't even include, he probably had a fair amount of fumbles, I would imagine. So he'd kind of been like, I think we had said before, Tommy turnover there a little bit. Bettis, he only played in 10 games, and he only had 800 yards rushing. So that averages out to 80 yards a game. So that's really very ineffective at best. The bigger part was the defense was middle of the pack at 15th. They're 15th ranked, so a very mediocre defense. And the offense was towards the bottom of the middle at 19th. So, I mean, the defense really wasn't all that great. I remember the defense not being clutch too. Like, they gave up a lot of late game scores and stuff. Like, they just couldn't make a play when they needed to.
Well, that kind of carried over from the previous. So not to go back 2 seasons, but
yeah,
we did an episode way back when, I think it was our very first episode on the 2002, the Tommy Maddox season, where Cordell kind of got himself benched, and Tommy Maddox, as journeyman quarterback, came out of nowhere, and he started heaving touchdowns and throwing for 400 yards a game. And all of a sudden the Steelers are scoring 30 points a game, but the defense stunk. In 2002, they couldn't stop the pass and they were giving up. They were getting gouged like crazy. And in 2003, it's like they weren't necessarily getting gouged like they were in 2002. They kind of leveled off to like being, like you said, kind of like mediocre. Like it wasn't their complete Achilles heel, but they stunk. Like they weren't good. They certainly couldn't, they certainly couldn't win them games. And when you didn't have Maddox throwing for these huge amounts of yardage and throwing interceptions, all of a sudden, now you had no real path to victory.
Yeah, and remember that was Polamalu's rookie year, I believe, and I didn't look up how many games he played, but they still had like the Brent Alexanders of the world playing, and he really was not even. I mean, he was kind of mediocre on a good day, and I think that was part of the playmaking. Is like they had Ferrier, they had Hampton. I mean, they still had Joey Porter, but they just didn't have that other. They needed Polamalu. Just shows how good Polamalu really was. Because, the next season, I think their defense jumped up the first in the league. So,
right.
And that was his rookie year. So he's safety sometimes, a young player, especially at that position, takes a minute to figure it out. So we're going to go over some stuff that happened in this draft. So all that to say, that's how the Steelers ended up in the spring. Would that be the spring of 2004, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
So that they end up with the 11th pick in the draft, and that's 6-10. So that's what it took to get the 11th pick. And I didn't look that up. Like, I think that's their highest pick they've had in a while.
If they're
without trading up, I guess. I don't know where they. Do you know where they picked Devin Bush? I don't remember.
He was 10th. So
yeah, but they had to trade up.
They had to trade up, right?
Yeah.
It was. I mean, like you said, it was their last losing season. So definitely they haven't had a higher natural pick than that since then. And I think Cowher, trying to remember Cowher's teams. I think he had a 6-10 team in '99. So when they, or maybe that was 5-11. I think when they drafted Plexico Burris, I think that was 8th. So that was probably the only Cowher team that drafted higher. But you're right, it was unusual for them to draft that high. And Steve, do you remember kind of some of the like the series of events that kind of shook out for them to get that 11th pick? There were some things that happened at the end of the season.
I remember Chris Hope throwing a touchdown and they lost. They lost to Baltimore.
Yes.
In overtime. And then I actually watched that game with you and Dave, I think.
Yes.
And not Chris. Was it Chris Hope? Or no, it was Josh Miller.
It was Josh Miller throwing
to Chris Hope. Yeah. Yeah. And like that was Baltimore went all out to beat us in a game that didn't matter. And they ended up like playing like really bad the next week.
Right. So Baltimore had clinched the division. So this was the last game of the season at Baltimore. And the Steelers are 6-9 at this point. And like you said, Baltimore has a wild card game the next week against Tennessee. And there's questions about, are they going to just rest all the starters? However, their running back, Jamal Lewis, had close to 2,000 yards, and he had a chance to break Eric Dickerson's record, all-time single season rushing record. So they were trying to get Jamal Lewis the rushing record. And it was a terrible game. It was 10-10 at the end of regulation. And you were right, Steve. The only touchdown that the Steelers had was Josh Miller, the punter, on a fake punt throwing an 81-yard touchdown pass to Chris Hope. And the Ravens got the ball in overtime and kicked a 47-yard field goal to win. And had the Steelers won that game, I mean, that was in overtime. So had the Steelers won that game in overtime, they draft way lower than that. And I don't know if you're going to talk about the other teams that wanted quarterbacks, but one of the other teams that wanted a quarterback would have ended up drafting in front of them. So that was an interesting series of events that happened there. And then there was another game that same day, the last game of the season, where Arizona shocked Minnesota on a last-second touchdown. Thrown by Josh McCown, ironically, who I don't think he's still playing, but he was still playing.
I think he retired last year. Yeah,
15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And
I remember that because that put Green Bay in the playoffs, didn't it?
It did, and
Yeah.
it I think it dropped Arizona down to the number 3 pick. I think they might have vaulted over the Chargers. So there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened. It kind of had to happen the right way for the Steelers to end up where they were. And you never think about that at the time because hey, you
It's
finished
the
with what you
11th
finished
pick.
with.
Yeah. It's the 11th pick, too. How often is like 11th pick like that influential of a pick?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Like if that season would have ended and the Steelers would have won that last game and people would be like, oh, now they have the 15th pick instead of the 11th, we just would have shrugged and be like, okay, fine. But it turns out it turns out being something that literally changes the franchise, losing that stupid game to Baltimore. So thanks, Ravens.
Thanks, Brian Billick. I don't even remember who their quarterback that year was.
It was Steve McNair.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, towards the end of his career there.
Right.
Yeah. So, where do we want to begin here? I gotta just have some topics we can go over. So the first one is like, remember we did like that, what if, and we kind of got into that right there, like what if this sequence of events happens? And it's very like weird what happens. So what happens if Eli Manning and Philip Rivers don't get traded? So in our alternate universe, we'll explore this. So this is like, we'll start with that. So Eli Manning, he got traded from San Diego to the New York Giants. And this is what really happened. Philip Rivers traded from the Giants to San Diego. So, like, it's kind of a weird, they're not allowed. So that's kind of like what set up us getting Ben. And that was a big thing because Eli Manning didn't want to go to San Diego because I guess he saw Drew Brees and Ryan Leaf, and the Chargers weren't like, they became like a better organization after that, even though now they're in LA. But they just like, their ownership has always been like, I think Spano still owns them, and he's always been kind of a little bit goofball. So there was talk that like Eli might go the way of John Elway and like just hold out like he did in 1983. Yeah. And so he's like, I'm not playing for you. So what happened was the Chargers drafted Eli and they trade him to the Giants. And then the Giants drafted Philip Rivers. And this is how Ben ends up falling to the Steelers. And now, it's funny if you watch that, like the NFL Films has like a path to the draft. Like if you watch Lee Steinberg, like Ben's agent, he gets really pissed when that trade happens because they thought, Ben would have been going. Now, Ernie Accorsi, who I think is lying, like, because if he admitted to just drafting Ryan Leaf to trade him to the Chargers, that would have been against league rules because you can't draft a player for another team. And so I think that's why he always says, oh, we're going to draft Roethlisberger over Ryan Leaf. So I don't know if that's true or not, but like, it's just funny. Lee Steinberg was obviously Ben's agent was getting mad because Ben not going at 4th in the draft obviously cost him like how many millions of dollars in commissions when Ben only went 11th because he got paid less money. So Lee Steinberg was definitely not upset because he, liked Ben. It was because he just could see the dollar signs ticking away from himself. But
yeah, Ernie Accorsi was the general manager of the Giants, and it's ironic because he was the general manager of the Colts whenever they drafted John Elway. So he was around for both of those incidents, and this time he was on the other end of it. He was on, instead of being on the team that the guy didn't want to play for, he was on the team that the guy did want to play for, and that's what you're right. He sticks to that story. He says, hey, if the Chargers weren't going to do a deal for that pick, we were just going to draft Roethlisberger because they did not want Philip Rivers.
That's what he says. I don't know how true that was.
Sure. And we'll never know that. Like, I mean, he can say whatever he wants at this point, but the story is that the Giants either wanted Manning or Roethlisberger. So they weren't going to draft Rivers and just move on. They were going to draft Roethlisberger, and then Rivers would have fallen to who knows where at that point. So, but they did get a deal done, and I don't know. I mean, that Eli, that was a lot. His dad was involved in a lot of that. Archie.
Well, yeah, if you watch those interviews, the interviews I read, now I don't know if it's Eli just going back or what. He says it was all his decision and that his dad wasn't happy about it, that Archie wasn't happy about it, but Archie took the heat for him because he was like, oh, it's a 23-year-old kid and he just wanted to take the heat for him. Now, I always thought it wasn't the dumbest move in the world because I think, especially Archie, I could see him saying that. It's like, because Archie Manning probably would have, if Archie Manning plays for the Steelers and not the crap teams, like who'd he play for? New Orleans and then
Right.
Houston when they weren't very good after they had been good. Like if he plays for like the Steelers or like the 49ers or like not the 49ers in the 70s, but who else? Dallas or somebody like that. Like he probably has a Super Bowl ring. So I could see like Art. That's why I always thought it always kind of rung true to me that Archie Manning might have said something. Now, Eli Manning says that isn't true. I don't know why Eli Manning would have a reason to, not be telling the truth there and he said that after he was retired and it was on like a Giants podcast. We'll have a link to it. So, I mean, there is a lot of kind of like he said, she said, or I guess there's no she's in this. So he said,
Well,
GM and player said. I mean, it's just kind of weird that like Eli Manning, like it kind of makes you like, I don't know. Sometimes I can see like how the Mannings can be unlikable. Like first Peyton Manning's like, I'm staying in school. Yeah, that's a big choice for you, Peyton, because like if you get hurt, you're going to make like millions of dollars selling cars in Nashville for the rest of your life. It's not, or Knoxville or whatever. You're not going to be hurting for money. It's like, meanwhile, all the other players that, don't have that luxury. And then Eli pulls this, like how many other players could pull this? Like you always hear that complaint about the draft. Oh, what other business in the world where you don't get to choose where you work? Well, I don't know. Like, I don't think you can like, once you work at like one franchise restaurant, you can't, pick to work at another one. They just kind of tell you where to go. I mean, I don't know. It's just
going back to your like what ifs. I mean, what if Archie Manning played for not even the Cowboys? What if he played for like the Houston Oilers, like one of those teams that was
when they were good? Yeah, like like instead of who was it, Pastorini, it was him.
Right. Like maybe he doesn't win a Super Bowl, but maybe he also doesn't have the experience of having his career wasted on a crap franchise, and that's what happened to Archie Manning. His career, Jack Ham. If you ever listen to Jack Ham, he always says that. He says Archie Manning was one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But he played for New Orleans, which was just, New Orleans went something like their first 20 years without having a winning season, something like that.
Yeah.
Like literally. So they were like Pittsburgh Pirates level bad. And Archie Manning just wasted his whole career there. So having that experience, he doesn't want the same thing for his son. And that's what drives all this. And maybe if he doesn't have that experience, then Eli goes to the Chargers.
Yeah.
And maybe the Giants do draft Ben. And going back to the Cardinals, I think that can't be overlooked either because that was a Hail Mary. That was, I mean, it wasn't really, it was basically a Hail Mary.
It was not a Hail Mary. It wasn't like he threw it from the 50. He was inside the 40 when he threw it.
But it was
definitely the corner of the end zone.
It was the corner.
And it wasn't like a floater either. He threw a line drive there. I mean,
so what happened was the Vikings were winning. The Cardinals had one last play. Josh McCown throws this pass in the side of the end zone, which wouldn't be a catch today because the guy had 1 foot up and 1 foot out of bounds. But back then the rule was if you got pushed out of bounds.
Oh, that's right. Foot, yeah.
Now today that wouldn't matter. Today that's not a catch. Back then that was a catch. And that on the very last play of the game of the season beats the Vikings, which like you said, Steve, knocks them out of the playoffs. But if that pass isn't complete, the Cardinals get the number 1 pick. And I don't know. Would they have drafted Eli Manning? I'm thinking they would have. They had Josh McCown. So they probably would have drafted Eli Manning, which meant that the Chargers.
They ended up. Well, yeah, the Cardinals end up with the 3rd pick in the draft.
Right. So the Chargers would have been 2. They could have gotten Rivers, and then the Giants would have been 4th, and they could have gotten Ben. I mean, I think that's probably what happens if that pass falls incomplete.
Well, and the Raiders ended up being 2 in real life. And Who did the Cardinals draft with that third pick that year?
Some receiver that wasn't any good. I don't
Yeah,
know whatever happened to
he
him.
didn't even win the Heisman. I mean, he wasn't even
No,
as good as
Jason White.
Jason White. Yeah, he wasn't
Yeah,
even good as
he was
that
no
guy.
Jason White.
Who
Well,
wasn't even drafted in this draft.
well, if you really want to follow the butterfly effect, Steve, I mean, that pass being complete almost lost the Steelers the Super Bowl because that, I mean,
Yeah.
literally, right? I mean, follow that all the way through. That pass being complete leads them to draft Larry Fitzgerald, which again almost beats. I mean, the Steelers were 30 seconds away from losing that Super Bowl, really because of Larry Fitzgerald. So, yeah, I mean, man, so many interesting like things that could have happened and went different ways.
Another team that I know we talked about the Cardinals. Why didn't the Browns draft him? Like, I looked at this too. Like, the Browns end up drafting Kellen Winslow, and I realized like Butch Davis, the Miami thing, that was his guy in college. But like, here was their quarterbacks. I looked up who are their quarterbacks. Kelly Holcomb, who was like maybe mediocre. He was like Tommy Maddox at best. Tim Couch, who was a complete bust. Nate Heibel and Josh Booty. Have you ever heard of either of those? Never. So two like obviously just throwaway guy, not throw, but just backups at best, and one bust and one guy that probably is just going to be a backup. And they literally drafted Kellen Winslow, who I think he made a couple Pro Bowls here and there, but like if they would have had like Ben, who knows what would have happened there? Or maybe they Archie Manning. He pulls an Archie Manning and just wastes his career in Cleveland. And I think Ben wanted to go to because he's from Ohio.
Right.
I mean, Finley, I don't know. That's kind of up north, right? Yeah. So he might have liked Cleveland, and he has more wins in Cleveland than most of the quarterbacks since 2004. So go figure. Like we said, more than likely.
Wait, hang on. I just wanted to answer your question of why the Browns didn't draft Ben. There's a very good reason, actually. It's because they're the Cleveland Browns.
I had a feeling that was going to
Yeah,
be the answer.
that's the reason. So,
Yeah,
and Kellen Winslow, I somewhere
he
along the way
wasn't
we
a
talked about him
bad.
before.
He wasn't a bad player, but I don't know. Like, let me look at his pick again. That he would have that year. He was the 6th pick in the draft.
Yeah.
Like, I talking about another team that missed out was Detroit. Roy Williams. Come on, Roy Williams over Ben. Like, who was Detroit's quarterback that year? Joey Harrington or?
Yeah, but they had just drafted him like 2 years ago. I mean, I think Cleveland, it was more egregious because I guess they were still trying to bank on Tim Couch because that was their franchise guy.
Couch, that was 4 years in, 5 years in.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, if he hasn't done it by now,
Joey Harrington, I can understand because I think they drafted him 2 years earlier, and you're that's 2 years later is hard to justify another first round pick. But the Browns just and Kellen Winslow, what him and his dad both I can't stand. And he was so he had all this controversies. He was doing motorcycle stunts. I remember he got hurt.
I think that's how he ended his career.
Yeah, he got in trouble because he referred to himself as a soldier. People got really offended by that. He had to like apologize for that. And so just all that kind of stuff. He just, his dad didn't want him to go to college if there was a white coach. I mean, stuff like that was just, he and the Browns deserve each other. And again, that's why the Browns are and have been the Browns. And man, I won't even get into how much I really hope they fail with this Deshaun Watson thing, but that's why they didn't draft Ben, because they're the Browns, and they just, when the time comes to make the right decision, they pretty good chance they will not do it.
Well, as much as we love ripping on Cleveland, I guess we'll have to move on a little bit. So, and if things would have like stayed the way they were, like we said, Eli Manning goes to San Diego, right? So Eli Manning decides, okay, I'm going to just play for San Diego. There's a team that drafted me. I'm okay with that. I like the weather out here. I got LaDainian Tomlinson to hand the ball off to. I got Antonio Gates. Maybe things won't be so bad, right? So the Giants would have drafted Ben according to Ernie Accorsi. So we'll take him as his word, right? So does Philip Rivers get drafted by the Steelers?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, so at the time, the reason that not everybody, the reason that people think that is because he went to NC State, and Bill Cowher's an NC State guy,
But he
right?
built well, I guess we're jumping ahead. Remember, Bill Cowher wanted somebody else. He wanted
Well,
Sean Andrews,
right.
and Rudy had to step in. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure you'll get to that, but I think
Yeah.
the thought process there is, okay, if they were going to draft a quarterback and Rivers is the guy, again, Cowher has that NC State connection. Again, nobody really knows what their draft board looked like and who they had ranked where. So, maybe they had Rivers above Ben like everybody else did.
This would be great if we could have got what's his name, the guy Kevin Colbert who just retired. I wonder. I mean, now that he's retired, he's maybe talk about this honestly. Like, would you have because Colbert was in charge. Yeah, he was
Right.
Would you have honestly drafted Philip Rivers if he was available? Because I mean, Cowher wanted Sean Andrews. We'll get into that. I mean, how many? So once again, the fall is so Ben's now in New York. How many Super Bowls does Ben win in New York? And does he fit in with Tom Coughlin, like the Colonel up there? I'm not sure how that works out for Ben and Tom Coughlin.
That's another great question, because Tom Coughlin was a very different kind of coach. Does Tom Coughlin let Ben improvise? Because that's really what made Ben great, especially those first.
I mean, do they try and coach that out of him? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good what if too. And then the Chargers, my goodness, like what happens to the Chargers?
Well, that's what I said. Does Eli just languish away in San Diego like his dad did in New Orleans? But like I said, he had LaDainian Tomlinson and Gates. I mean, so like they had two pretty good offensive players, and they ended up having a pretty good team. Do they at least win one Super Bowl there somewhere along the way?
Yeah, so, good question. A really good question.
I don't know.
What if you really want to go? What if, Steve? What if San Diego just doesn't draft a quarterback and sticks with this guy they have named Drew Brees?
Yeah,
who becomes the NFL's all-time passing leader? I mean, what if they do that? What if they draft Fitzgerald, right? Or somebody else, right? What if they draft Larry Fitzgerald? Now you have Drew Brees throwing to Larry Fitzgerald for the next 10 years.
Who was the second pick? Robert Gallery, who ended up he was a
bust, but he was
a mini. I would say he was a mini bust, because once he moved the guard from tackle, he was really good. He made the Pro Bowl guard. So like, once again, I think that's just like, he's kind of the Devin Bush situation. Like if Devin Bush wasn't, or not, and the other guy more, Terrell Edmonds, like if Terrell Edmonds isn't drafted in the first round, I'd be like, oh, okay, he's a third round pick. Okay. Same thing with Robert Gallery. If he's a little later down the board, I think people don't, if he's where Sean Andrews, the guy, Bill Cowher, like everybody's like, okay, and that's like Bill Cowher, like that's who he wanted to draft, was Sean Andrews, who was a All-American tackle from Arkansas. And he ended up, when the Steelers took Ben with the 11th pick, and thank God we did, he was drafted 16th overall by Philly. In Philadelphia, had a 6-year career, made 2 Pro Bowls, and the Philadelphia Eagles put him on their 75th anniversary team. So, I mean, let's say Bill Cowher does get his way. Dan Rooney decides not to interject, and they take Sean Andrews. I mean, someone else is going to get. So that means Lee Steinberg's really pissed off now. He's really seen the dollar signs go out the window. I mean, I think I looked at the draft. I didn't look. I mean,
I know where he goes.
Next team is the Jets who picked Jonathan Vilma.
No, not the Jets, because they had drafted Pennington. The team that drafts him is the Bills, because the Bills did draft a quarterback, not a third. So
JP Lossman, yeah.
Right. So the Bills, the Jets had the number 12 pick. The Bills had the number 13 pick. The Bills didn't draft a quarterback there because Lossman was too high, but they had 2 picks. So they drafted Lossman later in the first round.
Yeah.
So if Ben falls to 13, I mean, if Buffalo's taking a quarterback in the first round, that's where Ben goes. He goes to Buffalo. I think that's guaranteed. And again, if
Well, maybe they had a pretty good team that one year in 2004. The next year, yeah, when we beat them with our backups.
yeah, they still had
Yeah,
Bledsoe. They still had
yeah,
Bledsoe. But
yeah.
Bledsoe was at the end of his career at that point. And I think that yeah, Ben doesn't come in and start for them. He wasn't going to start for us either, which I'm sure you'll probably get to. But he that's where he goes. He goes to Buffalo. And if we win that overtime coin toss and we kick a field goal to beat Baltimore in that last game of the season, then we're behind Buffalo because
Oh wow.
Buffalo finished
Yeah.
6-10, same
Oh,
record
same
as
record
us,
as us. So I don't know how they settle that. There's probably some sort of
right?
tiebreakers,
But if
or
we
they go
finish,
to the old trusty coin flip tiebreaker,
but if we
which
finish
is
7-9, then we're definitely behind them. Like there's no
yeah,
coin flip at that point.
yeah.
And so then the Bills end up with Roethlisberger. I mean, I don't see any other way around that. Like Roethlisberger definitely goes to Buffalo at that point. If they were going to draft JP Lossman, who was a reach, as it were,
Yeah.
then they were going to draft Ben. They wanted a quarterback, so that's where he goes. If we win that game against Baltimore, or if the Steelers take Andrews, and Andrews was a really decent offensive lineman. Like to your point, 2 Pro Bowls and 75th anniversary. He was a very good offensive lineman, but Sean
He's not
Andrews
a quarterback.
doesn't
Yeah.
win you 2 Super Bowls. Sorry.
No, yeah. And I tell you what else is I doubt the Steelers in 2004 go 15-1 with that. I mean, that team was pretty good, but they probably like maybe they have another slack off 6-10 year. Maybe it just doesn't come together, like, you know. And so even let's say they have an 8-8, like they improve. The defense is so good they win like 2 or 3 more games. That I don't know where that would have put them in the draft, but I bet the next year, guess who fell to number like 24 or 21st in the draft?
Oh yeah, Aaron Rodgers.
So
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers on this, so
Wow.
yeah. So the ultimate ripple effect, Aaron Rodgers is now a Pittsburgh Steeler, and they definitely win a Super Bowl with that guy. And that team, yeah, they're winning a Super Bowl.
Well, that 2004
Yeah.
team, I don't think would have finished 8-8 because remember what happens. The Steelers by
They
week
would have
2,
been fresh out of quarterbacks.
they
I
would have
don't know
been Brian
who would have
St.
been
Pierre.
playing. Yeah, Brian. Well, they won. They beat Buffalo with Brian St. Pierre. So,
But again, that week 2 onward, and I can't remember when Maddox came back, but for the first 4 or 5 weeks after that, that would have been Brian St. Pierre. So that would have been no, they would not have finished 8-8. I think they would have been 6-10 or 4-12 or something.
not
And
with that defense. If that defense plays even half as well,
okay,
I mean,
okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
But like you said, definitely somewhere near that number 11 spot again the next year. And then, like you said, Aaron Rodgers falls. So, boy, that's an interesting thing to think about, like how the history would have played out differently. And then you would have had Buffalo as a contender during that era because they would have had a quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of being absolutely horrible for years
Right.
and years. And did they have Eric Molds, and they had that running back that was pretty decent too. So, yeah. Thank God everything that all didn't happen, huh? So, getting back to reality instead of alternate reality. Let's look at the I just wanted to do the stats of the 3 quarterbacks who wore it best, I guess, or who had the best career, I guess, would be more Channel or Inner Joan Rivers, or I don't know, Steve Sable at this point. So I'll just quick stats comparison. Philip Rivers, and Philip Rivers is a decent person, by the way. I didn't really go over that. We kind of skipped over that, but like I just wanted to say that, like, I know we sometimes like, oh, Philip Rivers won a Super Bowl or this and that. He's like a devout Catholic. He's a good person. I know he has like 20 million kids. So like maybe like just to go back, if Philip Rivers does end up on the Steelers, we don't have all the scandals like that we had when that Ben had it early in his career. Like Philip Rivers isn't riding his motorcycle and wrecking. He isn't getting accused of all this off the field stuff. Phillip Rivers is like going to church and raising his, gaggle of children. So,
Yeah,
but good for him. He genuinely seems like a devout person and a very well, whatever you want to say. So,
yeah, I agree. And it's annoying that he is like him and Andy Dalton both. Those are two guys
yeah.
I always wanted to hate, and they're both actually like really decent human beings. So hard to hate them. But I think Rivers. The only thing that used to really annoy me about him was he would just kind of chirp a lot
He
during the
does.
game.
He does talk, like if you see him mic'd up, he like really like talks some trash. It's not like I don't hear him swear very much, but he just like, oh yeah, we did that, or we got you on that post pattern. It's like not even like anything too personal, just weird stuff. I don't know. But on the Phillip Rivers stats, enough about his personal life. Phillip Rivers touchdowns. He had 421 in his career with 209 interceptions. Now, he did have 29 comebacks and 35 game-winning drives. So that's Phillip Rivers in San Diego, with some San Diego teams that probably weren't that great, quite honestly. Eli Manning, not as many touchdowns, 366, and he did have 244 interceptions, which Eli Manning, like he has 27 comebacks and 37 game-winning drives, and obviously, I don't know, was the games tied in the Super Bowl? I think one was tied and when they were down, weren't they? Can't remember.
They were down in the first one.
Yeah, and then the other one, I think they were just tied, right?
Yeah, because I believe so, but don't quote me on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so that two of those game-winning drives were in the Super Bowl. So and he got MVPs for both those Super Bowl wins. Yeah, I mean, Eli has had a really. I like to compare Eli to Terry Bradshaw because he always seemed to throw like a lot of interceptions. Like he had a lot of bad interceptions, but it seems like when the chips are down and you need a game-winning drive, and if Tom Brady and Johnny Unitas and Joe Montana aren't available, I've always said this: I'll take Opie any day of the week. And you know what? Opie could have thrown 4 interceptions up to the fourth quarter. If you're within a touchdown or 4 points, put him out there, put the ball in his hands. He's going to figure out a way to win it. He is like one of the more clutch NFL players in NFL history. He really is. But on to Ben Roethlisberger, who's probably, I don't know if he's quite as clutch as Eli, but he's pretty close. Ben had 418 touchdowns. He actually has better stats than both of these guys, believe it or not. 211 interceptions, 41 comebacks, 53 game-winning drives. He has 2 Super Bowl wins and 1 Super Bowl winning drive. So I think overall Ben has the better stats. I mean, I guess Rivers has 3 more touchdowns than him, and Ben has 2 more interceptions. So, but I just think that Super Bowl drive, and he has a lot more comebacks, and I don't know. I just think Ben's the better quarterback per se, but Eli is so clutch. I don't like. I go back like I like Ben Roethlisberger. He's a great quarterback. Won a couple Super Bowls. We wouldn't have won those Super Bowls without him. But man, outside of, like I said, outside of Tom Brady or Johnny Unitas or Joe Montana, give me Eli. I'll take Ben too, but I mean, if I wasn't allowed to pick a hometown guy, I'll take Eli over any other guys you'd pick besides these 3. Tim?
Yeah. I mean, Eli, he's the only guy other than Nick Foles who ever beat Tom Brady in a game that mattered. I mean, it's really true. Like he's the only guy that could beat Tom Brady in a Super Bowl, and he did it twice. Once when Tom Brady was undefeated.
Matthew Stafford, he beat him in a playoff game.
Yeah, I mean, but in a Super Bowl, I mean, again,
okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what Brady played in 14 Super Bowls, so it's just that's amazing in and of itself. Like Eli should be in the Hall of Fame just for those 2 games, and it's so strange because those Giants teams were never great. That Giants team in 2011, they were 7-7 on Christmas. They were 7-7, like, and they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl 6 weeks later or whatever. That's that, those teams were never great. They were never done like, but they won 2 Super Bowls and they beat Tom Brady both times. So you're right. Eli was clutch. You got to give it to him for that. And Rivers was very, very good. I just, do you blame him? Do you blame the organization? They could just never put everything together. They had so much talent on that team. Like Eli didn't have that. I know he had like, Tiki Barber and some good players, but and Plexico Burrs had some good seasons there, but he did not. LaDainian Tomlinson was like otherworldly. Antonio Gates might be the greatest tight end of that era. Like they had some real talent on that team, and they could never
Merriman,
win
Sean
anything.
Merriman was really good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they had way more talent than the Giants ever did, and he just could never win. And were they in the same conference as the Patriots? Yeah, but I mean, how many times,
They lost that one game to the Patriots when they had the game won. They had an interception, and then like the guy just like instead of just sitting down with the ball, he's like running around, and then Troy Brown like strips him, and like it was so annoying. That was one of the most frustrating game. Like, and I'm not even a fan of the Chargers, and I'm definitely not a fan of the Patriots, but like I can't imagine like being a fan. Like they should have won that game. It was like, oh my goodness, that was almost like something the Cincinnati Bengals would do.
and that wasn't their only. I mean, everybody remembers that one and that was definitely their biggest gaffe. But there were literally like 7 other times in that game where they even all the way up to the last second field goal that they missed, that they could have won that game. And that was just how they rolled. And that's kind of honestly, like, it's funny. We talked about that forgotten playoff game years ago between the Steelers and Chargers. It's funny that their history is, they had this era with Dan Feltz and Kellen Winslow Sr. and Chuck Muncie and all these Sean Jefferson, all these great offensive players, and they couldn't win anything. And then fast forward 25 years, and they had the exact same thing. This great talent, and they couldn't win anything. And to this day, their only Super Bowl appearance was Stan Humphries. I mean, it's just
That team, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess they had what's his name, Junior Seau.
Yeah,
Natron Means wasn't bad.
yeah, but
That team was no, they weren't as not as good as
yeah, were they a threat in the AFC any other year other than that? I mean, they had that one kind of magical year, and that was it. And Stan Humphries was a journeyman, but the Chargers teams of the 70s and 80s and the Chargers teams of the 2000s, they were contenders every single year. Every single year they were going to go to the Super Bowl, and then they just never did it. So,
well, Ben was definitely very clutch, and you could argue who was more clutch, him or Eli. I guess you give the edge to Eli just because he has that extra Super Bowl win. It would have been nice if Ben could have pulled out that win against Rodgers,
yeah,
but it wasn't to be. I mean, that would have been too soon. That would put him in elite company. Like he's already elite, but like imagine like him with 3 Super Bowl wins and 2 Super Bowl comebacks. Like you would argue, I always thought if they would have won that Super Bowl, they would have been better than the Patriots. They could have said, okay, we're better than the Patriots, but then the Patriots went on and won like 9 more Super Bowls after that. So,
yeah,
but like I always thought if they could have won that Super Bowl, they could have been the Washington Redskins of that era. Like nobody ever thinks of the Washington Redskins of like what the late 80s, early 90s.
right.
Like they won 3 Super Bowls, but everyone's like, oh, the 49ers, who were the better team. But, the Redskins won 3 Super Bowls in the 80s too. Yeah.
Right.
And I always thought like that's where that team would kind of end up. Like they were a great team. They just weren't quite as great as the Patriots, but they were great in their own right. But be that as it may, was this the greatest draft of all time? Another great like talking point, maybe. I don't know. And also, like under that, was this the greatest quarterback draft of all time? So in 1974, the Steelers, that's probably the greatest draft of all time. I mean, it's hard to argue. 4 Hall of Famers and Donnie Shell, who didn't get drafted, was signed as a free agent. They all went in the Hall of Fame. Like I said earlier, 1983 is definitely considered the greatest quarterback draft of all time. 8 total quarterbacks taken and 3 Hall of Famers. And none of those were named Todd Blackledge. But obviously, it's John Elway, Dan Marino, and Jim Kelly. where you're 3 Hall of Famers from that. And so, I mean, overall, I don't know. Uh do you think 2004 is better than 1983 and at least because I don't think they're as good as the 1974 draft, but I'm not sure about the 2004 1983. Like there were
Well,
definitely more quarterbacks taken in the 1983 draft. And that guy that played for the Jets that everybody always like,
Ken O'Brien.
yeah, he had a decent career.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and Tony Eason took the Patriots to a Super Bowl. I mean, he wasn't great, but he wasn't terrible. So I think that's a good comparison, the 83 draft, because it's very similar where you have a lot of quarterbacks. You have the guy that refused to play for the team that drafted him at number 1, like a lot of parallels there. And so, yeah, you said there was 3 Hall of Famers. You're probably going to have 3 Hall of Famers out of the 2004 draft when it's all said and done. The 3 guys you're talking about, are those 3 as good as Elway, Kelly, and Marino? Like if you stack the 3 of them up against the 3 of them, I'd probably say no. But I mean, if you're counting Super Bowl wins, they've got double the Super Bowl wins of those guys, so you got that at least.
Let's see, John Elway. Yeah, Elway's the only guy that has any with 2.
Yes.
It is crazy because all those guys played in the AFC. I mean, Kelly went to 4 Super Bowls. Marino went to 1. Elway went to 6 or 5. 5.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they made a lot of Super Bowls, but unfortunately, the Redskins and 49ers were just better teams overall. I mean, and they lost to who did the Dolphins? The Dolphins lost to the 49ers, right? And so,
yeah,
and Elway lost to the Redskins.
Yeah, and Kelly lost to the Cowboys and the Redskins and the Giants. Like, so they were definitely up against the best teams of that era. But still, I mean, hey, the Eli and Ben were up against the Patriots and Kurt Warner and Aaron Rodgers and so it wasn't like there wasn't competition for those guys either. So yeah, maybe Kelly, Marino, and Elway are better quarterbacks, but I mean, going back to your argument about clutch, I'd rather have Eli Manning or Ben Roethlisberger than Dan Marino or Jim Kelly.
Well, that's a good point. Whatever happened to all these quarterbacks? Like we said, Philip Rivers never wins a Super Bowl, but he's a generally nice guy. And I think he ends up in the Hall of Fame. I don't see how you keep him out of the Hall of Fame. If you're, is Jim Plunkett's not in the Hall of Fame, right? But there's other quarterbacks that don't have the resume that he does that are in there, I'm sure.
I believe Jim Plunkett is the only, I think the trivia question there is he's the only quarterback to win multiple Super Bowls
and not
be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Who's eligible? Obviously Ben and Eli aren't eligible yet.
Eli hasn't been out of the league 5 years yet. Oh, wow. So Eli's won 2 Super Bowls in New York, and number 1, because it's in New York, and number 2, he's been very clutch. And like I said, and I don't think he threw a lot of interceptions, but not enough to where it's like Terry Bradshaw. Like I always kind of thought Eli, like I said there earlier, Eli and Terry are very similar players. And it's just, he's going to get in the Hall of Fame. He's a lock. And I think if Ben doesn't get in on his first try in the Hall of Fame, there's something wrong with the Hall of Fame because, I could see Philip Rivers maybe have to wait a year or 2 just because these other 2 guys are going to go first and depending on who else they're up against. But I think Philip Rivers will get in. It might just take him an extra couple years.
Ben was definitely helped by Tom Brady coming back because
because they were going to be well, that helps Philip Rivers actually because they're going to put Ben in. I can't imagine Ben isn't going to go in the first year he's eligible, and Eli too. So they might. I don't know when Eli's eligible, but Ben and that would have been Ben and Brady, and they're not going to put in Rivers at the same time. So when did Rivers retire? A year before, though, right?
Correct.
So maybe he still gets in. Maybe they put Rivers. Well, they normally don't put you in early. They normally wait. It really depends on who you're up against. It really does.
Right. Again, when it's all said and done, I think all three of them will be there.
I would be shocked if they weren't. I mean, I'd be shocked if Philip Rivers doesn't get in. I mean, I guess you can hold the no Super Bowls against him, but like I said, I don't think he was ever like, and two, he's not like a guy that was mean to the media or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think Ben, if he would have done the Barry Bonds thing through his whole career, like just been a total jerk to everybody all the time, like maybe Ben doesn't get in on his first or second try just because the media wouldn't have liked him. But I think Ben's rehabbed his image enough to where he'll make it in. He'll make it in.
Agreed.
And it is weird, like how both Ben and Rivers, like at the end of their careers, couldn't throw a ball more than 10 yards. They both are like their arms just like, you know, Ben's arm really went like after that Dallas game, not this year, but last year. I thought after that he couldn't really throw the deep ball anymore. So
A little fantasy football tip for folks that play fantasy football that I've really picked up on in the last few years. If you get a lot of points, if you have a running back that catches passes, try to find a running back that has an old quarterback, because old quarterbacks love to just dump off to the running back and check down to the running back. And so Najee Harris had a lot of those kinds of catches last year because Ben just dumped off to him all the time. And whoever the Colts guy was the year before, Marlon Mack or whoever, had the same thing because Rivers was doing the same thing.
that was the infamous fourth down play where like, oh yeah, it's 4th and goal, and he just dumps it off the like what's the point? Like that's how you kind of knew Ben was at the end there, because he just would have, all the days you just would have ran around and probably thrown an interception or a touchdown, and he wouldn't have cared either.
He was definitely done, but like, man, to your point about clutch, he still made like 6 fourth quarter comebacks last year.
Yeah, and
including the game
he was
to
a
get them in the
statue.
playoffs.
He was a statue in the
Yeah, one of the podcasts I listened to at one point joked during the season they were just going to get him a chair. Like they would just snap the ball, he'd be sitting in a chair.
But yeah, he's gonna laugh all the way to the bank and to the to the Hall of Fame. And good for Ben, he deserved it, he earned it. And hopefully, Eli and Philip, they'll see him there too in Canton. So if you have any disagreements with our assessments of these guys, that's too bad, because we're right and you're wrong. I'm just kidding, of course. You can check us out on Twitter. Feel free to message us on our website. And thank you for listening to our podcast. Keep up listening, and word of mouth and giving us ratings on whatever service you listen to is great. And spread the word, and hopefully find more fans and people enjoy this content. Thank you so much for tuning in.